Okay, welcome. So this isn't working the way it should for some
Oh
stupid
dear.
reason.
No, it
Because
says
apparently we're
I.
live, but on a different stream. So I have no clue why this is, but we are live.
Can
I
you
put
hit? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can
yes.
hear you. I cannot see you.
Yeah, because it says on my screen looks like your camera was unplugged. Plug it back in or select a different camera. I'm not sure. Well, let me just see.
Hmm.
Let's
Yeah,
just
because
see
It
if
could be a settings issue.
one moment there's a button. It won't let me select the camera. It says start cam, but I'm clicking it, but it
well,
won't.
if you there's a cogwheel that says cam mic. If you click
Yeah,
that, then you should be able to
yeah.
select your camera.
Okay, it's come up with a settings option. Um, it's just got a box which has a camera with a cross in it. It's not.
It's weird because your camera was working just a few seconds ago.
Oh
So
yes, absolutely.
Exactly, yeah. So I've got a tab at the bottom which says it's got 5 options: mute, start cam, cam mic, share screen, leave studio.
mm-hmm.
Start
But
cam.
start cam is highlighted in pink. I don't know what that means. It won't let me
that
click
means
it.
that means that the camera is
I can
off.
click right, and how do I switch it on?
Just click it, then it should come on. Okay.
Mark Caesar asks if the computer has the
No,
coronavirus. Well, I haven't heard of it
yeah,
transferring
looks like it.
computers, but you never know.
Hold on, no. When I press start cam, it doesn't. Nothing's happening. And then there's the option next to it is cam mic. Do you want to, Peter? Do you want to try go back to the screen we were on previously, because
No,
I
it's
think the
it's
camera
not
was working there, wasn't it?
it's not on my end. It is on your end. So if as long as the start cam is pink, you have to click that
Yeah,
button to start the camera. It should be white.
but it won't. Yeah, but it won't let me click it. So when I press it, nothing's happening. If I press the other
Would it
options,
would it trouble everything terribly if you were to close and reuse the link to enter
Yeah,
the StreamYard?
yeah. Drop off and
I,
then
okay,
rejoin the stream.
Collect again.
okay, I'll
Perfect.
do that. Yeah.
Okay. And the live chat popped up.
Yes,
So
everyone. Hello.
yeah, we're apparently
Anchoven CPA.
we're apparently
Horrible.
on a different stream. So I have no clue.
Oh dear. Okay, you
There
see,
we
I'm
go.
seeing
Yeah,
three
that's
again.
fine. Can you know?
There we go.
Yeah. You're what?
Can
Sorry.
you put it
Yeah,
back to one for
on
us,
both.
Peter?
Right.
Sorry.
Can you put it back to one screen for us instead of
Oh
three
yeah, sure.
screens, please, Peter? Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, right. There you go. Good.
Well, finally. Uh, so
Yeah, got there eventually. That's
Drama.
good.
uh, Lilith, welcome. Nirushan, welcome.
Thank you.
Nirushan emailed me after the show that Robert did on Modern Day Debate, and he checked out our channel and said he'd like to come on. So,
Excellent.
Nirushan, tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe why you wanted to do this, and then start off with what your beliefs are and why you believe it.
Sure. Okay. So I'm a medical doctor by profession, and I was born and raised in the UK, which is where I currently reside. My parents are of a Hindu background, but so growing up, I had exposure to both Eastern and Western ideas and culture. But I myself am not religious, and I don't subscribe to any religious dogma nor associate with any religious institution. So, what do I believe? The only thing I believe in is myself. And the reason for this is because I can't possibly know anything else. And I think this is a point which Socrates made when he said, "The only thing that I know is that I know nothing." But interestingly,
Wisdom.
yeah,
Man
absolutely.
who knows how ignorant he is.
But interestingly, Descartes followed this up by saying, well, actually, there is something you can know, and that is yourself. And that was brought out from his famous quote, "I think, therefore I am,"
Cogito
which
ergo
means
sum. Yes.
exactly, which means I know I am, I know I exist. And I think that this is the beginning point of spirituality, which is, the acceptance that you know nothing other than yourself. And then the inquiry into what this self is can begin. So the questions of who am I, who is the knower of these thoughts, who is the perceiver of these perceptions, who is the feeler of these feelings, and this is where the mystical traditions come in and help you address these questions. Okay, but the biggest impediment to arriving at this understanding is, in my opinion, indoctrination with false dogmas.
Ah, yes.
And we've seen time immemorial that religious dogma has been the biggest dogma that has, impeded this. But now, in my opinion, in particular in the Western world, it's actually, and more so in probably Western Europe than in the US, where you are, a little bit. It's a
No,
new form of indoctrination, which is by
no,
science or scientism, with the central thesis or the central doctrine of scientism being evolutionism. And so
See,
this is something. Yeah, sorry, carry on.
oh, sorry. I was just going to say, first of all, I'm Canadian.
yeah,
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
That's quite all right. Unfortunately, we are close neighbors to the United States, so their idiosyncrasies are noted quite
Yeah.
frequently. They are our neighbors. But I have to interrupt you with the ideas of scientism and evolutionism sounds very much like something Kent Hovind would say.
yes.
As a doctor, do you not accept evolution as a biological reality?
No, I do not. Now, that's not to say I completely refute evolution. I don't claim that evolution is false, but what I would claim is that evolution is unproven. And by that, I mean it's not been proven to a reasonable degree such that it should be considered as fact and taught as fact
In what
to
sense?
children.
Like what aspect of it do you object to? For example,
What?
I presume you don't object to, natural selection weeding out
No,
characteristics that work. Is
no.
it or
I,
don't
I,
work?
I,
As you
I'd go a step further. So we've observed it in nature and in the lab. So how would we
appreciate.
be able
Okay. So
to
when you
refute
say
it?
what do you mean you've observed it? How would you clarify that for me?
we've observed speciation in,
Well, no, I think that's an error. I don't think we have observed speciation.
well, we have.
How else would you say, for
No,
example, qualify the development of the nylonase bacteria?
well, bacteria. Okay, so experimentation on bacteria has shown that a bacteria can develop antibiotic resistance. They can develop different abilities to live on
Yes, but
different.
this one developed the ability to eat nylon, a purely synthetic material that has no parallel in nature, and it evolved the ability to consume nylon, which would significantly alter its properties, such that it could reasonably be considered a new species, although in
Well,
bacteria, it's a bit, the definition of species is a bit more difficult because they don't reproduce sexually.
exactly. So I
Well,
would still contend that that's not speciation. That's not evidence of speciation.
I go a step further.
And
I don't exactly know the name. I do know that there's a lizard that was introduced on an island in Italy, where it had to feed off of different types of food, and it developed an entire new digestive system to adapt to the new conditions, and therefore now is an entirely new species. So,
Well, I don't think it's been demonstrated that it's a new species. Remember, speciation means that the original
The original
species.
species are branched into two distinct species, which are
Exactly.
either not biologically compatible or are so distinct that they would not breed in nature, even if they might be able to, much like the horse and the donkey, produce a mule that is not generally fertile. I mean, every once in a while you'll get one that's fertile, but they're clearly very closely related, but not
and we've seen that as well in we've seen that as well in ring species, whereas the end of the line can no longer interbreed with another end of the line, which also would mean speciation.
That valley in California, or that what's the name of it? The cavern in
it's California. Easy. It's easy. So you have if I'm not correct, so you have polar rabbits, California rabbits, and then a little lower down there's another species. The species lower down cannot interbreed with the polar rabbits, but
everybody can next door neighbor
each other. The polar rabbit can interbreed with the California rabbit, and the California rabbit can interbreed with the third one. So there is a distinct speciation. But regarding what I wanted to ask regarding all the genetic evidence that we have, which points to evolution, we see evolution
as a twin.
Yeah, and we even see evolution in human beings. So that there are pockets where I know in Africa. In Africa,
that's a very interesting point. You're going to have to clarify that, Peter. Evolution in the human beings. I've never heard of.
Yes.
Never heard
so
of that.
there are pockets in Africa where people.
For example, as well as the wisdom from when our brain to jaw ratio was a little different from what it is now. But there are other things that are explained very neatly by evolution and by common ancestry that make no sense the other way. For example, you're familiar with the laryngeal nerve, I presume, as a doctor.
Absolutely, the recurrent laryngeal nerve. Yeah, I understand it.
And I mean, I understand the argument. In every single vertebrate, including the giraffe and presumably dinosaurs, which is completely freaking ridiculous. The whole thing goes down from the brain, wraps around the aorta. Now, if you look at the skeleton of, I believe the earliest vertebrate found is Pikaia grasslands in the Albertan Rocky Mountains, quite next door to me. And it would make sense for the nerve to have crossed the heart at that point. I want to ask, where have you looked for evidence of evolution? Because the consensus is, indeed, was it the American Academy of Sciences has said essentially at this point, there is so much evidence in favor of evolution that it could not be disproved wholesale.
Yes.
No longer. But, basically, any new thing would have to account for all the information we currently already have. So it would only be a very slight variant on what we know already. It would not be a completely different origin of life.
Yeah. So where we're currently at is that we could that there are some details that could be changed. The fact that evolution is a fact. It's not only a theory; it's also considered to be a fact. Is recognized by pretty much every scientist on the planet.
Well, what I would say to that is, what would Galileo say to that argument you just made?
He wouldn't know, because he wouldn't have the information that we have today.
Well, the point I'm making is Galileo, when he proposed his heliocentric theory, went against the consensus. Right?
He did.
Everybody refuted it. Initially, everybody rejected his idea. They said, no, we have a geocentric model which explains planetary motion and the solar system. But consensuses are often wrong. Scientific history, the history of science, shows us that the consensus is often wrong. If you argue for consensus, then you would both be arguing that race theory, 100 years ago, race theory was correct. The idea that white people are superior, intellectually superior to all other races, and that was science based on cranial capacity and other
word theory, scientific theory. You're familiar, no doubt, with the fact that the word scientific theory is distinct from how we might use it in common usage. I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Scientific theory is never proven.
Yeah, it's well, and.
Well, can I just jump in real quick?
I just want to clarify this one point, because biological evolution has been repeatedly touted as the most successful theory in science, more successful than the theory of gravity in creating demonstrable predictions and to have predictions.
Okay, so give me some predictions. Give me some predictions that the theory of evolution has made.
Oh, there's
Darwin predicted a moth in Madagascar with the absurdly long proboscis
the best
pollinate
example,
that particular flower with an extremely long bell. He also predicted the discovery of a bird with unfused wing fingers, which was Archaeopteryx, which was initially mistaken for a dinosaur because it still had teeth.
Hold on. The best one we have is Tiktaalik, because Tiktaalik, we only knew that it should exist. We knew when it should have existed. Sorry.
So I won't take credit for their work.
A prediction was made. If we know when it should exist, we can go to the layers from that age, and we should be able to find an intermediate species between fish and land animals. So that led them to a place in Canada which had that specific layer from the exact time. They started digging there, and they found Tiktaalik, just as the theory would predict.
But Peter, can I interrupt you there and say that's not what is meant by scientific prediction?
That is what is meant by scientific prediction.
No, a prediction is something which. Okay, so a prediction is something which is about to happen in the future, right? You can't predict something that's happened in the past and then go and search for it and say, I will predict
yet. Because if these predictions were made before the thing was discovered, it says in this evolutionary model, there should be a piece right here. We haven't found the piece right here. Yes, of course it is. In what way is that not? The discovery is in the future.
Well,
yeah, the discovery is in the future, but scientific prediction is about an event which happens in the future based on the scientific law. So, for example, the theory of gravity.
Sorry. Time out. I have to interrupt, because a scientific prediction makes a prediction about the whole theory. So it can point to every single point in the timeline. But getting back to if you want a prediction for the future, it is literally how humans have used evolution to, for instance, breed dogs, breed different kinds of plants they can eat, broccoli, the banana.
Oh, everything. Cauliflower, watermelon, bananas, oranges.
So this is literally this. Hold on. This is literally us manipulating evolution, taking over the environmental pressure, and instead doing artificial selection, so we can actually use that. The same thing goes for instance, making flu shots. If you're a medical doctor, how would you explain flu shots?
That's nothing to do with evolution. That's
How is
it
that?
is.
How is that nothing to do with evolution if they're going to make a
The virus
vaccine
continues to evolve at a high
based?
rate because it is a
the
virus.
virus.
Thus
The
is more
virus
prone to
changes.
high ranges rates of
The,
evolution.
the virus changes. Okay, I accept that. Right, but that does not prove speciation. That does not prove
Hold on.
evolution.
If the virus,
that does not prove common descent.
how does the virus change?
Now,
What
well,
demonstrates common descent is genetics and the ability to trace both the mitochondrial DNA and the DNA of any species and create a family tree by comparing any sequence of genomes within it and the degree of differentiation between them. Things such as retroviral markers without our own genome. Are you familiar with, oh, what's the name of the fellow, Peter, who was the witness in Kitzmiller versus Dover, the Kenneth Miller? He's
yes.
an evolutionary biologist and a Christian, so he does have religious beliefs. Obviously, you're not a Christian, but you know, he wouldn't have any theological.
Yeah.
He wouldn't have any theological stake in holding up evolution.
Actually, Kenneth Miller is Christian.
Yeah, I know. That's what I said.
Yeah.
He's
Okay,
a Catholic, in fact. Francis Collins, also a Christian, more of a C.S. Lewis Protestant type, but nonetheless, whatever. The point is, neither of them would have a theological dog in the ring to support evolution.
Yeah.
And yet, Kenneth Miller he understands evolution so well, he's actually the leading textbook author on the subject. And after the Kitzmiller, are you familiar with Kitzmiller versus Dover?
No, please.
Of course.
Explain that to me. I'm not familiar
please,
with it, to be honest.
Pardon me. No, well, and of course, it was an American thing, so you know. And of course, there are a lot of young Earth creationists in America that are trying to get their pseudoscientific bullshit indoctrinated into schools, as you know. And creationism wasn't selling, so they rebranded as ID, intelligent design, which was basically just an endless series.
Sorry. Yes, I'm
from ignorance.
Yeah, I'm aware of the ID movement, and
Oh, okay. Well, this then I'm very surprised you didn't know about Kitzmiller versus Dover because Michael
I might have come across it, but I can't recall, to be honest.
Well, this was a few years back, but it was it was a trial.
It was in 2005.
Thank you, 2005. Dover school district. They had a whole an attempt to get pandas and people put in the new edition that had creationism replaced with intelligent design ID. In fact, it was actually quite amusing because in the trial there was one part where they had only half changed the word, and it made a very interesting spelling mistake.
So let me explain. Wait, Lilith. No, let me explain that fact. So what they had of pandas and people was a creationist textbook. Then there was a court ruling that creationism could no longer be taught in public schools. What they did then is they changed it over to intelligent design. So
but I want to deal with the
intelligent creator. No, the creator was replaced with intelligent designer. And so they messed up.
A general unspecified creative force. They were trying to keep it a little more vague and not theologically grounded in like 6-day creationism. But I want to finish this point.
Okay, go ahead.
Because the judge who ruled on that was a lifelong Christian and a Bush-appointed Republican, which would have put him in, and he had previously verbally supported the teach the controversy idea, which was the idea of teaching a controversy between evolution and creationism, basically, or intelligent design, whatever you want to call it, branding. But he had prior to that supported that. But in the trial, Michael Behe, who has written several books on intelligent design, as you're familiar, and several others, came forward and presented their best argument for intelligent design. And there's been 2 documentaries made on it, which information you can confirm at any time, because of course there are court transcripts and they can be made available with the Freedom of Information Act and have been. The judge was appalled, actually, at the dishonesty of the members of the ID movement that testified there. In fact, their star seemed to be the bacterial flagellum, pardon me.
Right, yes.
Which I'm sure you've heard it couldn't possibly, it's irreducibly complex,
So,
etc.
yeah, complex, yeah.
Right. And then, of course, he found, first of all, that, for example, Michael Behe had erroneously redefined terms to try and avoid evidence that had already disproved him, but also that when he sat in the seat and the other side came to him, they said, "Are you familiar with scientific explanations based in evolution for the bacterial flagellum?" And he said, "No, I don't believe there are any sufficient." And he was presented with 58 peer-reviewed articles, as well as an entire series of textbooks on immunology and
38 books.
Was it 30? Okay, I can't remember all the numbers on that, but it was a significant quantity of well-vetted material, none of which he had read, and which he already considered, without having read any of it, not good enough. So my question to you is twofold. What research have you done on evolution that you would consider any aspect of it insufficient, and or any aspect of the research thus far to be insufficient? And two, what would be sufficient to convince you of common ancestry?
Right, yes, so good questions. So I don't argue against, well, firstly, I should point out, actually, I'm not necessarily pro-creationism. I'm not part of the ID movement.
Oh, no, I didn't assume you were with the six-day creationists in Kansas or anything.
Good.
No.
And the other thing I want to point out is I'm not actually against evolution. I'm not saying evolution is false. The point I'm trying to make is that evolution has not been proven to a reasonable degree. It could be true.
Why do so many
could be
biologists
false.
disagree with you on the degree to which it has been demonstrated?
Well, because that's the problem of indoctrination, and that's the point I'm trying to make.
Nirushan, I'd be curious if you could answer Lilith's question on where you did your research.
Sure.
What are your sources? Well, exactly. What are your sources for this claim?
Yes, exactly, Peter. I'll explain this. Okay, because
yes, please
my point is that my point is that you don't need to be an expert in evolution to criticize it, to critique it. Okay, and because I don't believe it is a scientific theory, I'm arguing against the evidence that evolutionists themselves use. I'm not disputing the evidence. I accept the evidence that they use, but I'm saying the conclusions that they draw from this evidence, or rather this data, is not consistent. And
well, could you give us an example of an inconsistency you found?
Right. Okay. So how can you prove speciation from genetics? It's just not possible. You can't do it.
Have you?
Absolutely.
I would significantly, I would strongly suggest actually watching. Kenneth Miller did sort of a class, and they published it openly on the internet, explaining his experience in Kitzmiller versus Dover, because as you know, he was the evolutionary, the pro-evolution, if you want, witness, but he's also a believer, and the whole God thing, that wasn't a problem for him, the whole, believing in God or not. He wasn't Richard Dawkins, which was a good thing, because that would have taken it off in a totally different direction.
Yeah, obviously.
And he talks about things like our genetic similarities to other apes, that we're half a chromosome away from a chimpanzee, and not
but
just...
That's equivocal. Because
okay, well, it depends exactly how you're going to quantify it. It can be between 93 to 98%, depending on how you're going to dictate the genes. But either way, you're still looking at 90%, over 90% of identical sections huge quantities of codons, including retroviral markers, which can only come from common ancestors unless you believe.
Well, that's an assumption.
Oh, well, not really. The probability that two completely distinct ancestors would have the same retroviral markers at identical.
Well, that's not scientific. That's probability. That's
yes,
that's not scientific.
Probability does influence how we understand a thing scientifically. If we're talking about something that's so wildly improbable that it's like throwing a pin and hitting the sun,
Can I ask a question? Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So, you know, obviously that we do paternity tests and maternity tests based on DNA.
Absolutely.
So, and what you are implying is that there is a limit to where we can go back. Can you explain why? Yes. Can you explain why there is a limit, what the exact limit is, and how you found out that there is this particular limit?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can't. Okay, Peter, if you analyze your DNA and my DNA, we cannot establish our relationship, our biological relationship from that. Of course, you can go back.
Actually, we can, and we have. Actually, we can, and we have. Okay, but go ahead.
Okay. At most within a species.
Is the total fraud then, for example?
Sorry?
Do you think 23andMe or similar services that will trace your genetic code and give you some of your genetic history throughout the globe, do you think that they're fraud?
Okay. At most, I will concede that you can perhaps within a species, okay? But you cannot extrapolate that to say, between species, interspecies relationships. You cannot,
You are familiar that some genes can be switched off. You can have the gene, but it can be deactivated in some sense.
I have another question regarding species. So how do you explain that part of the human species have Neanderthal DNA, part do not?
Excellent question. Now, I would say, isn't it intriguing that fact, that observation? Because to me, logically explaining that observation, surely that means that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens are the same species. So could you explain to me why evolutionary biologists
hold on, because you're contradicting. You're contradicting yourself. Because if we can distinguish that part of the human population have Neanderthal DNA, another part, hold on, Lilith, another part has not. Then apparently, Neanderthals are different species because part of us has that DNA, part of us doesn't.
Yes, exactly. So, Peter, the situation is non-African Homo sapiens have Neanderthal DNA, whereas African Homo sapiens do not, right? So the natural conclusion to draw from that would be, well, Neanderthals are part of the Homo sapiens species. But evolutionary theory has instead decided to go along with the idea that actually Neanderthals are a separate species, which makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense.
They are distinguishable.
In what sense are they distinguishable?
Well, okay. First of all, in paleontology, their physiological characteristics are.
So I'll stop you there. Is comparative anatomy enough?
Comparative anatomy is enough
to determine speciation. So you're saying comparative anatomy is enough to determine whether two organisms are different species?
I did not say that because I am not finished.
Okay.
Now, first of all, we have comparative anatomy, which shows very distinct characteristics that we do not possess, as well as a range of genetic variation in terms of height, breadth, and so forth. And
I would argue there's more variation within the dog species than between.
I know. I'm saying Neanderthals have more variation than Homo sapiens. That's all I'm saying. So that's enough to be indicative of a distinct species. Once we got into genetics And we were able to find that their genetics were sufficiently distinct to trace. And I admit it's a gray area. Now, I'm going to be quite clear on this. There has been some scientists who have pushed for Homo sapien neanderthalensis as opposed to Homo sapien sapien, because we were able to crossbreed just a little bit at the edge. Again, we're talking about 3% DNA, but still, there is clearly their DNA is distinct enough to distinguish it from ordinary Homo sapien DNA. And this, again, it strikes me as difficult to imagine how this would be evidence against evolution, because the problem of speciation is a recognized problem in biology, because a single definition does not fit all comers. There's always a gray area. There's a gray area because of speciation, because there is that they're apart-ish, mostly, kind of, sort of. You can't draw. It's the beard fallacy. It's the beard fallacy. The whole you can't draw distinctions if you can't find. Just because you can draw fine distinctions doesn't mean you can't draw broader distinctions. Obviously, you have a beard. I do not have a beard. Just because you can't pick which hair would turn my face into a beard doesn't mean there's no difference. So the thing is, it's never just one point of evidence. It's that this is the best explanation for this point of evidence, and also for this other point of evidence, and also for this other point of evidence. And after about 5,000 of those, we go, okay, we feel this is well enough supported because it's the best explanation for 5,000 facts.
Well, it's an explanation. I would argue it's not the best explanation. I could probably come up with better naturalistic explanations.
Indeed.
Lamarckism is coming back into favour now. An alien theory would be better.
Lamarckian evolution would still be evolution. It would just be a replacement of Darwinian natural selection.
It's very different from the idea of evolution, evolutionary theory as it stands at the moment.
It would pass on inherited traits, and it is built upon the idea of common ancestry, or at least somewhat more muddled family trees than we perhaps initially thought.
Well, okay, what about this idea? I mean, I could propose a hypothesis that all species on Earth were created by an alien species, an extraterrestrial species, which comes to Earth periodically and extincts old species, right, and recreates newer types of species, modified versions, right? So they're slightly different. One moment. So they're slightly different. They've evolved. They're modified. They've got new traits, new characteristics, new morphological characteristics. Now, what is your evidence, right, to suggest that your hypothesis of evolutionary theory,
I'm fully prepared to answer.
It's stronger than mine?
No. I'm fully prepared to answer that. Because, I grant the number of details I have to hand at the moment are limited, but I can at the very least some of the history, because that actually is contained within the history of debate on biology and on evolutionary theory. You mentioned Lamarckism, which is the idea that a biological organism could prefer certain traits almost as an act of will and then pass them down to their offspring, which doesn't make a lot of sense with genetics, but at the very least, the passing down to offspring is certainly it's an issue of Lamarckian versus it's actually sort of a different explanation than natural selection and sexual selection, and of course group. It's never as simple as just one little thing, but primarily natural selection, we'll go with that. When it comes to the idea of species growing, diversifying, all being wiped out, and someone coming in and creating a clean slate, that
so like punctuated equilibrium, that sort of picture.
No, that's not punctuated equilibrium.
Well, no, I'm saying this would account for that. My hypothesis, but carry on.
It's not punctuated evolution. Stephen Jay Gould absolutely affirmed Darwinian evolution. He thought that there were that it wasn't sort of gradual and consistent, but more jumpy in terms of response to Yeah, so
Sorry,
I
Lilith,
just
I interrupted your stream of thought, but carry on with what you were saying.
But it's actually contained within the history of debate on evolutionary thought because although it wasn't aliens, it was, of course, Christians who thought it was God, who thought that God had, in fact, made a bunch of animals and they grew and then he got bored and wiped them out and made a bunch more.
Yeah.
And that was their explanation for the dinosaurs, which is why many of them objected, biologists at the time objected so strongly to the classification of Archaeopteryx. Because it had unfused wing fingers, which means from a skeletal point of view, it had fingers, just plain old. And it also had teeth. So they said it's clearly a dinosaur, even though the impressions of the feathers showed not just feathers, but like fully developed flight feathers. So it was indeed fully a bird, well adapted for flight, proper flight, not just your flying fox kind of skimming about, hopping about. So that is actually part of the history of debate on evolution, and whether it's God or whether it's aliens isn't really relevant to this particular, like whatever it was.
No, it is relevant. Well, sorry, carry on.
So I'm saying the distinction between God or aliens, whatever.
I agree.
Coming in and reseeding on a new. But that would not explain why we have so much genetically.
No, it would. It would, because an alien species could come to planet Earth, extinct the old species, and recreate the new species, right? Which is slightly modified. Okay, there are slight genetic variations, new morphological characteristics. Fine.
Why?
So the point I'm trying to make is, what is your evidence for speciation? What is your evidence that one species gives birth to the next species? Because my hypothesis works absolutely fine with the evidence, as well as yours does. In fact, probably more so because of the evidence in the fossil record, which Stephen Jay Gould pointed out, which suggests sudden stasis, sudden appearance.
No, not sudden.
Hold on.
Sudden on a geological scale, which is not the same as sudden. Geological scales are like, oh, it was only 2 million years. Oh my gosh, it was so quick.
Lilith, let me hold on. Let me jump in. Let me jump in real quick. Lilith, I'm not sure if you have DM open on Twitter.
Oh,
but,
I apologize.
So we have a question. We have a question from the side chat, which I think was an interesting one because as I said, I haven't checked you out. We have some pretty active people in the side chat. So we've got a question from a friend of mine. God hates us all. If Dr. Oh man,
I love your name.
Your last.
What is it?
I have no clue how to pronounce your last name. Sivanesan?
Sivanesan. Perfect.
Okay. If your book Objections of Evolutions was such a monumental hypothesis, why did you have to self-publish the book, and was it submitted for peer review?
Absolutely not. Yeah, it wasn't submitted for peer review because how can you peer review? You can't look. If you object to something, this is an insular society, and you can't. How can I subject a critique to this society which is promoting this theory? It doesn't make any sense.
Actually, you can't.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. There's no anti-evolution committee.
I have
my ideas to.
Hold on. Time out.
I already agree with you.
Okay.
Time out. I do have a solution. If you're unaware of how you should go about this, I could introduce you to I think I could introduce you to P.Z. Myers, who could then explain to you how the
I would happily engage with him.
No, what I'm saying is he could explain to you the process of peer review, having had some of his papers published. I have another friend called Scientist Mel who has published her findings.
But Peter, can I just say
time out. Let me finish first. So if you are unaware of how peer review works, I could get you in touch with people who could help you to getting your papers peer reviewed, that wouldn't automatically mean that it would be accepted. But
I know.
my question is, if you
At
wrote
least you would.
if you wrote a paper on all of this, if you did your tests and came to a different conclusion that mainstream science has, why haven't you gone out to see how to get your findings peer reviewed? Because
Because
that's not something that is difficult to do, and everyone can submit their papers. Everyone
Get
can
it.
submit their papers to peer review. You don't have to be a registered
okay,
scientist. You
because
can.
my arguments.
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry, I was like, yeah. So my arguments, I accept they're non-scientific arguments, they're philosophical arguments. I'm actually critiquing the evidence that evolutionists used to promote their theory. So there's no, you can't really peer review what I'm saying. And if you read my book, Objections to Evolution, you will see that the arguments are actually a critique of the evidence, philosophical critique of the evidence that evolutionists use. So there's nothing really. I've not gone out and performed my own research or my own data.
Okay.
I'm actually just
Okay. Then let me hold on. Let me ask you this. So what you are saying or implying is that philosophy will trump an observed fact. Can you explain
yes, exactly.
how
Because yes,
how this could happen?
I will explain that. Because my whole argument is that evolutionary theory is not a scientific theory. It's a question of faith, not science. And similarly, for example, if you were to
There I have
criticize any
sorry
faith,
sorry there
if
I
you were
have
to
to
criticize
there I
any
have
faith,
to
like the
sorry
Christian faith,
sorry there
then
I
you
have
would
to
not, you would
sorry
not submit your criticisms to a
there
peer
I have to
reviewed
object. Sorry, there I have to object.
Yes.
There's no such thing as faith in a scientific theory.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
I
That's what I
don't
mean.
I don't know if
Evolution
you
is
I don't
not,
know if
it's
you
not
I don't
Evolution
hold
is
on.
not a matter of faith.
Time out. I don't know.
well, it
We
is.
need
It
to
is in my opinion.
hold on.
Really
We
isn't.
need to stop talking over each
Okay.
other, because
Okay.
otherwise
Yes.
no one will be able
Okay.
to hear what we're saying. So if one of us is
Absolutely.
talking, please let the other one finish until starting to talk yourself. What I'm saying
Yes.
is, you're probably not aware. I'm an epistivist. I reject faith as being the most dishonest position you can have. So,
Okay.
and also, faith has nothing to do with science. Science is about things you can demonstrate.
I
You
agree.
can things you can test, reproduce,
I agree.
and
I agree.
you can have objectively confirmed or denied. There's
I agree.
no faith.
I agree
There's
with
no
all of that.
faith. There's no faith in any of this.
Okay, so let me come on to that now, Peter. Let me respond to that. I would argue that evolutionary theory is not science. And the reason I argue that it is not science is because it is not observable, it is not testable, it is not reproducible, and it is not falsifiable. And also, it does not make any meaningful predictions about the future.
Which are claims.
So it is
Which
not,
are claims.
and
Hold on.
I will
Hold
argue,
on.
I
Hold
will
on.
also,
Time
I
out.
will also
Time
say
out.
it's not falsifiable. It's
Time
not
out.
falsifiable.
Time out.
either.
Which are
And-
claims. Which are claims which you need to demonstrate.
And I
Can
can.
you-
You have
can
to
you-
ask me,
can you
and I will
demonstrate that?
demonstrate them. Absolutely. So evolutionary theory is a question of history, right? And you might have heard like people like Ken Ham make this argument about historical science versus observational experimental science.
Yes.
Yeah, and to be fair, he has got a point, because
hasn't.
evolutionary theory is a question of history. It's about how we got here today. It's not about it's not a scientific law. It does not give you any meaningful predictions
There are many
about
scientific
what.
laws in evolution that do give us meaningful
Please,
Yes.
Lilith,
Yes.
give me some of them. Give
The
me some
law.
of them,
The
Lilith,
law of
please.
monophyly.
So please explain that to me.
The law of monophyly is that a species will reproduce its own species. So it will. So
Okay, well,
what it
that's, that's not.
so
I don't think
hold
that,
on, time out. Let me finish.
Yeah.
What it basically says is that you can never outgrow your ancestors. There's no way. There's no point in time when a descendant has outgrown its ancestors. Your
I can
ancestors will
demonstrate that.
always, well, your ancestors will always be your ancestors. There's nothing that can happen in nature that could end that. And that's
I can
basically.
demonstrate that. I'd like to try to demonstrate that. We've
Go
already
ahead.
discussed. I just want to follow his point. We've already discussed the laryngeal nerve, how it is the same in all vertebrates and only vertebrates, and it wraps around the aorta and goes up to, well, the larynx, or in the case of some fish, the gill slits, or what have you. Although in fish it's not as awkward as it is in giraffes. But what he said about ancestry is something that Ra touches upon when he says that we are monkeys, as well as apes, because your ears and my ears, these round ears right here, you see these?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Monkeys have those ears, and only monkeys have them. They are a diagnostic trait. However, your nose tells you what kind of monkey you are. New World monkeys, Karens, they have nostrils out to the side. Old World monkeys, such as ourselves and all the other great apes, gorillas, chimpanzees, bonobos, etc., have nostrils that point down. There is no diagnostic characteristic that the great apes possess that we do not also possess, including fingernails, mammarial glands, and the challenge prior to Darwin even of Linnaean taxonomy to say, find one diagnostic trait, any diagnostic trait at all that humans possess that apes do not possess. And nobody has ever been able to answer that question. Oh no, they are intelligent. They are able to produce tools. They're not active.
I've heard this.
Sorry, but that was literally the question that Linnaeus posed to the scientific community, because he was a creationist.
And nobody has.
He was a creationist. He was determined to find the difference between humans and apes, and he couldn't find it. So he put the question to the scientific community to come up with a distinction between apes and humans, because he was unable to find any. And from that point on,
complex social systems.
From that point on, every scientist has tried and has only come up with more traits that we share, more evidence that we are related, instead of something that would distinguish us from the great apes.
Peter, I will accept the anatomical similarities. Fine, okay, I'll concede that point.
Sorry, it's not only anatomical. It is genetic. It's morphological.
Okay.
That's pretty much everything that is addressed within the theory of evolution applies to the common descent of the modern day great apes and humans.
Fine, I accept that. So Peter, in Indian philosophy, for example, a distinction is made between animals and human beings, and that distinction is based on intellect. So it's recognized that animals have bodies, obviously. They have
Why
minds.
should we care about Indian philosophy? This is a legitimate question. It's a legitimate question. Why should we care? Why should we care? Hold on. Why should we care? Why should we care about Indian philosophy when we have
we shouldn't. I agree.
Let me finish my sentence, because you're agreeing with something that I haven't even finished.
Okay.
Why should we care about Indian philosophy when we have cold, hard evidence that can be independently verified?
Okay. So I was just making a point So the distinction is made between animals and humans in the sense that animals have bodies, they have minds, they can experience emotions, but they lack the intellect that human beings possess. Now, this intellect is very distinct. It enables a human being to rationalize, conceptualize, intellectualize.
You mean
Human
you
beings can
mean you
understand
mean
their
hold on,
human beings
hold on,
can
hold
understand
on.
their own
No,
existence. They can
let me
exercise
throw.
themselves over their own
Hold on.
nature. Animals
Here,
cannot. And this is
Nirushan,
a clear
Nirushan, hold
distinction
on.
between animals
Nirushan,
and human
Nirushan,
beings in
Nirushan,
all
hold on,
spiritual
hold
traditions,
on.
in all.
Before you go any further, I want to address that particular point that you just said about intelligence. To conceptualize, to make decisions. So basically, what Coco the gorilla does.
Mm.
Are you aware of Coco the gorilla?
No, just tell me. I'm not aware of what Coco
Okay,
the gorilla is.
Coco the gorilla is a gorilla that is held in captivity, that is able to speak in sign language, that is able to own and care for a pet, that is able to
who was heartbroken when her husband
that
died.
was told that was she was visited by Robin Williams. When Robin
Okay.
Williams died, they told her, and she responded just like a human being, that she was sad, and that
That's emotion.
she knew what
Yeah,
death was. She knew what it
and
That's
she's
implied.
emotion, not intellect.
she's
So
That's
expressing
emotion, not
this in sign.
yeah.
yes,
That's
so
emotion, not intellect.
yes, so that's not only emotional impact. That is being is
Oh,
having
so
cognitive
that's
senses,
emotion.
knowing
So that's my
what
point.
a death is, what a
That's
death
why I
is,
think
and what
we've
it
lost the
implies. You can
context.
talk over
That's why
me,
I think
but you
Peter,
we've lost.
won't. You can
Sorry,
talk over me, but I
sorry,
find
sorry,
this
sorry. I
very
think.
rude that you still keep talking over people when they're talking. And when I
Peter,
interrupt you for
I'll just
clarification,
apologize
when
because
I
no, I'll just
interrupt you for
apologize because
clarification, you
yes,
also keep
yes.
talking. So
No,
if
I'll apologize because I can't actually because of the delay and because of the connection. I can't actually. I don't. It's a
okay,
bit difficult to know when
this
to
is why
interrupt.
I have
So
put up the screen so you can see when I'm talking, and when I interrupt you, I will only interrupt you for clarification, because otherwise we will get onto a gish gallop, and it will be fairly impossible to address a thing that you said at the start of when you would started talking, and everything else that follows.
yeah,
So
I'll be quiet. Quiet from
what
now on.
I'm saying is that we have a gorilla that is basically capable of conceptualizing, that is capable of being self-aware, that is capable of being aware of its surroundings, the differences in creatures that surround her. She takes care of her own cat, her own pet cat. She feeds it. She plays with it. She caresses it. So pretty much everything a human being would do. So and you keep up bringing up philosophy, which I think is useless when it comes to science, because
Well,
modern science started out in philosophy, but modern day science is no longer about philosophy. It is about what you can demonstrate to be true, and it demonstrate means that you can have it independently verified, which is pretty much everything uh, uh, any other hypothesis that has been put forward lacks.
okay. So okay. So Peter and Lilith, would you mind if I move this on to because obviously you've questioned me now on why I don't believe in evolutionary theory, but could I ask you some questions about evolutionary theory, which are to me
Of course.
unanswerable questions? And this is yeah, and this is one of the reasons I just can't accept the theory because I can't grasp these concepts. Um, so let's start with the okay. So let's start with the. You may have heard of this argument, but it causes me a lot of problems, which is why are there no extant transitional or ancestral species?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah. Why are there no extant, living, ancestral, or transitional species today?
There are. Every
Please.
Lilith, your microphone is muted. We can't hear you. So there are. Every single species on the planet is an intermediary species.
No, that's not why is it? No, I asked for an ancestral species.
Lilith,
so a species
we can't hear you.
A species that has born a descendant species, which is
You're not
extant,
muted.
living today.
Hold on. We seem to have a problem with Lilith's microphone.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Yes, now you're back.
There
Okay.
we go. Fixed it. Sorry. Okay, I want to respond to what he said.
Go ahead.
Because by definition, an ancestral transitional species would be a species in transition to whatever the thing is now. Now, we can find animals that are very similar, such as the lungfish, such as the echidna and the platypus, which are the last remnants of the monotreme lineage.
What descendants do they have? What descendants do they have?
No, again, this is the point.
Mm-hmm.
If they had descendants,
Mm-hmm.
the descendants are the branch off. You can't say, like, you can have similar ones that have managed, but they'll be a little bit distinct because it's been a few years.
You mentioned the monotremes, platypus and echidna. So what are their descendants? That's what I'm asking. You said they're a transitional species. What are their ancestors?
I said that they were the last living remnants of the monotreme.
Okay, so they're not transitional species.
Mammals.
Fine. They're not ancestral
So
species.
the monotreme is a transition because this, and particularly in the case of...
No, I'm not asking whether the monotremes, I'm asking whether you can give me an example of a species living today, an extant species, which is a lungfish. So what is a descendant of a lungfish? Give me the descendant species of a lungfish.
Presumably...
Lilith, I think I can clear this up. Basically, what you are asking is, I can turn that around a little. Why can't I show you my great grandfather still being alive today?
Pretty much, yes.
Yes. So why would you think that if we go back, let's say 10 generations, that those people should still be alive?
No, not those individual organisms, but the species should still be alive, or could be alive.
The species is still alive.
Why not?
Because
my question is why not?
If they're ancestrally transitional.
Yes.
Yes.
For example,
ancestrally transitional, I accept.
Humans in our ancestral past, whatever transitions brought us to this point, we are the ancestors.
We are the ancestors.
That's
we are the descendants.
Yes, that's the point of transitional ancestry. Now, again, you're trying to trace, you can't ask for something to be both extant now and an ancestor of a traditional, without ever changing, but also having...
Why not? Yes, so that's my question. Why not?
Time.
Right. Okay. Change happens over time. So why is the coelacanth?
So there would be
why is the coelacanth not evolved in 400 million years? Why has the horseshoe crab not evolved into a new species in 450 million years? Why has the crocodile not evolved into a new species in 55 million years? That's the question. That's the point I'm trying to address.
The coelacanth was only millions of years ago, and they found a living one today. You've literally answered your own question with the coelacanth in particular.
Right. Okay. So let's take the coelacanth. Okay. So explain the coelacanth situation to me.
But first of all, I just want to go back because you said that evolution was not science because it was not falsifiable, and that's
okay. Well, hold on, Lilith. That's a different issue. Let's stick on the coelacanth. Let's stick on the coelacanth.
No,
so why is the coelacanth 400 million years old? Sorry.
This is an important point to bring up.
Okay, we'll come back to it. Can we stick on the
Scientists
Peter? Can we stick on the point now? Because Lilith mentioned
Lilith,
coelacanth.
let him
400 years
go.
old.
Let him go with the coelacanth first,
Yeah.
because
Yeah, explain it to me.
I have
want to
something
understand
I
this.
have something that I need to bring up regarding the coelacanth. So go ahead. Nirushan?
I believe it's you, Nirushan.
No. So Lilith, you were saying the coelacanth hasn't evolved in 400 million years.
No, I did not say
prior
that.
to
I
that.
said it has
Sorry,
not.
I say that. But
Yeah.
the point you make is that all species evolve. And that's why we have no ancestral species.
And just for clarification,
Do
are
coelacanth
you aware that modern day coelacanths are completely different from the ones that we find in the fossil record? They're not the same species.
Completely different, but not new species. Not different species.
They are different species.
Different.
There are. Do you know how many? Do you know?
I think that is. Look,
let's follow up. Let's follow up on this. How many species of coelacanth are there?
There's one.
No, there's not one. No, there's not one. There's not one.
The coelacanth.
There's not one.
The coelacanth
Hey Siri,
species is
how many
400 million years old.
coelacanth are there?
Sorry?
So there's not one. That's what I'm saying. So obviously you haven't done the research, because you
Coelacanth is an order, not a species.
Yes, exactly.
Look, okay, crocodiles. Check crocodiles for me. 55 million years old crocodiles. What are they?
Doesn't that fact in and of itself?
Hold on, because hold on. No, Lilith, time out. This is a creationist tactic. Once we point out that you are hold on, I'm talking. Once we point out that you haven't done the research and you have now no way to continue the conversation in your favor, you switch from coelacanths to crocodiles. Let's stick to coelacanths. Why don't you know, when you bring it up yourself, you brought up the coelacanth. How come you bring something up that you know nothing about?
Okay, so Peter, my argument is philosophical. So the coelacanth is reported.
No, it's not philosophical. That's what I'm trying to say. You brought up the coelacanth. You brought up the Lilith. Hold on. You brought up the coelacanth, right? You brought up that we find that in the fossil record, and we find it today. You are blissfully unaware that coelacanth is an order, that there are several species alive today. You have not done any research on the topic, yet you bring it up. Hold on. Yet you bring it up as a point against evolution, a topic that you haven't researched. Why?
Because Peter, look, you're missing. Sorry, you're missing the point of my argument, which is the argument I'm trying to make. It's not specific to a single species. The point I'm making is that there are no ancestral or transitional species extant today. There just aren't. Okay, but you can't just. Lilith argued that that's because things change over time.
You yourself brought up a transitional species, namely the coelacanth that we find in the fossil record, and the coelacanth that descended from that, which are the several species that are alive today, which are distinct from the ones we find in the fossil record. You brought that up.
I'd like to bring up a perspective here.
Go ahead.
A little bit different. Now, Nirushan, you said that you are addressing this from a philosophical perspective. You've said several things that are not entirely true of evolution, such as that it's not falsifiable, which, of course, scientists responded immediately. Well, just let me finish here.
Yeah.
When asked what would falsify evolution, I can't recall his name, responded quite immediately and without any difficulty: rabbits in the Precambrian era. You've presented the idea of... Okay, just...
Sorry.
Philosophical. Fine. Okay. But you are familiar then, basing your attitude in philosophy, with the concept of an argument from ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean, well, because some people who don't understand philosophy, of course, I'm sure you've encountered this yourself. If you bring up such as something like the argument from ignorance, they'll think you're calling them stupid because you're saying that they don't know something. It's not so much that they don't know something, which is fine. We can't know everything. Mm-hmm. Good Lord, I don't know what I'd do with my time. But that they are arguing from their ignorance, that their ignorance is somehow evidence of something. It seems to me that all you have demonstrated is that your perspective comes from an argument from ignorance. And in this day and age, and with access to modern technology, as you clearly possess, you are capable of looking up the answers to these questions and actually delving into them in somewhat more detail than just, the casual one-off question. Mm-hmm. And I hesitate. I'm curious why you haven't done that, because although we have studied these things as amateurs, neither Peter nor myself obviously are professional biologists.
Nope. Neither am I.
While we can precisely, and while we can study and bring up the ideas and the findings of biologists and understand them to a degree, not quite to the level that they do, obviously, because we haven't gone full study. You can't do that on everything. But those who know this subject more than us have identified those who know this subject more than them, and they all find evolution to be the best supported theory in all of science.
Yes.
Now, what is more probable? I'm going to bring in Occam's razor on this one. That experts identified by everyone in their field as knowing the most about this particular subject, who have devoted their entire lives to studying the subject, and who have been producing not only peer-reviewed papers, but the products of peer-reviewed papers being actual demonstrable technologies, such as technology, well, with regard to medicine and vaccines, or with regard to crops and various technologies with regard to food and growing, genetically modified crops. What is more probable?
Okay. So
that they have, no, but let me finish, that they have been indoctrinated into something that they are unable to question, which has nonetheless produced all of these demonstrable results that we all benefit from every day of our lives, or that there's something about this that you don't personally understand, not having studied it from an academic perspective, specifically to evolution.
So there's a lot to unpack there, but
it is quite
Occam's razor, for example, Lilith, which you mentioned. So like I said previously, my hypothesis of an alien species visiting Earth periodically and extincting species and recreating new versions of species based on the older type, okay, through methods and means which we don't understand. One moment.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. I would argue is as viable, if not more viable, than your theory that they naturalistically evolve or reproduce. So I don't think. Why not?
I have a question. I have a question. If it is more viable, so you're now making the equation that something that can be tested, independently verified, can be tested again and again and again and again, is less viable than your hypothesis, which brings me to a question. Hold on. Which brings me to a question that was put in the side chat by GeoSam that would be appropriate at this point. He asked, "Is Nirushan's hypothesis testable, or is it simply a claim which cannot be tested? Because if I'm going off of you saying that aliens are visiting the planet and creating new species, there should be evidence of that, and we should be able to find it.
Right. Good question. And there isn't evidence of that. But what evidence do you have that a species gives birth to a new species? That speciation.
We have as we have told you in at the beginning of this, we have observed this in the lab under laboratory conditions where we created the new species. We have also seen it. We have also seen it. We have also seen it in nature. We have observed it in nature. We have observed in nature that we get brand new species. So how are and what I wanted to, no wait Lilith wait, because I think Lilith, wait, time out. No, wait, because I want to interject just one more thing. Arn Ra put this out recently, and he said ignorance can also be pronounced phonetically, and I think that is what you're doing. It is ignorance. You ignore all the data that we have.
First, this is just a clarifying question.
Please.
Nirushan's understanding of evolution. I would like to ask a clarifying question about your understanding of evolution. Do you think, or are you under the impression that evolutionary theory includes the idea that at any time, any species of creature produced or gave birth to an individual of a different species than their parent?
No, Lilith, of course, I understand okay, well, that's actually a very interesting. Okay, that's actually.
I only have seen that argument.
That's actually a very interesting question, because that actually brings forth one of my objections. So you explain the process to me of how, because I think there are severe theoretical problems with how one species gives rise to another species. So please go forth and explain that to me.
I just want to clarify. Do you believe that any particular parents in any particular give birth to children that are not of the same species as their parents?
Well, that's a very good question. So would you agree with me that reproductive ability, is reproductive ability binary? You can either reproduce or you cannot reproduce. Would you agree with that statement?
Not entirely, as we discussed.
Okay, so you think there's a gradation of reproductive ability? Can you hear me? Sorry. Lilith, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. So do you think there is a gradation of reproductive ability, that reproductive ability can increase or decrease gradually over time?
Yes.
Is that what you think? Okay, fine.
There's a
So
gradation.
can you give Good. Okay. So can you give me any examples in life today of that phenomenon?
We literally already discussed this at the beginning of the episode with the mule.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's not successful. That's not a gradation of reproductive ability. That's unsuccessful reproduction.
No.
That's unsuccessful reproduction.
Nirushan.
They can't interbreed and produce fertile offspring, can they? A mule is infertile.
But you need to stop talking.
Okay.
The horse and the donkey are clearly closely related. They are no longer of the same species. This is a clear case of speciation because they are so closely related that they can produce offspring, and yet a vast majority of the time, that offspring is infertile. They are literally at this point in the distinction where they can just touch. Now, every once in a while, there is a phrase, something similar to the English version of once in a blue moon. I believe it's in Spanish, that is when a mule gives birth, because a mule can occasionally give birth. There are some that are not sterile, but only a very few, a minimum, certainly not enough to maintain an actual species of mules and going forward as their own distinct branch. So this is literally exactly what you requested. Now, when you talk about the specifics, again, I want to point to the beard fallacy, but this is observable in our own human development as well. If I were to ask you, at what hour of what day did you cease being a baby and become a child?
I agree. That's the analogy. Yes. I agree that is the analogy that is given, but that is not clearly that's not applicable here because reproduction is binary. Either you can reproduce or you cannot.
But it isn't.
Today do not suggest that there is a gradation of reproductive ability. Okay, so the examples you gave of the mule and the hinny, they're not cases whereby successful reproduction between organisms is demonstrated, between species is demonstrated. Okay, so there's no. So coming back to your initial question, Lilith. How does a species? I will put it back to you. How does a species eventually, down its lineage, give birth to a new species?
Well, and see, my point is that it is, as you said, as you yourself said, a gradation. There is never.
Well, no, I didn't say it was a gradation.
Lilith, can I please answer this because I have the answer to this.
Please.
So it is a change in allele frequencies over time, which is basically what evolution is. Another thing that I need to point out.
Do you have any examples?
Another thing that I need to point out is that we are now conflating species with kinds. We're not talking about kinds. Hold on. We're not talking about kinds because the difference between species and kinds is that species doesn't mean that all new species are no longer capable of interbreeding with other species. That is not how the definition of species is.
I would disagree.
Peter.
Would you disagree?
It is a light definition. The speciation problem is primarily it is those who can interbreed with each other chemically, but there's also an aspect of would they in nature, and obviously it doesn't work for everything.
It can also mean a really observable distinction in genetics where they still can interbreed. So, for instance, and I can put this up here. The whole thing started with Darwin finding the finches on the Galapagos Islands.
Yes.
We now have an entire new, what you would call a species. It's not exactly a species, it's a hybrid between two of the different species. That means the species can interbreed. While they're still new species, and in some cases, not in all, but in some cases, a hybrid species can become its own species. Not always. It's very rare that happens, but it can happen. So the term species is really plastic. There are no distinct boundaries that we could point to everything where speciation is observed.
It's an occurrence on a gradient.
Yes.
As all things in nature are. We make
Exactly.
distinct terms, and if you get far enough away from the point of divergence, you can make a very clear distinction. Cats and dogs, not the same thing. Very easy to distinguish.
It is based on genetics.
Point of distinction, it's a little fuzzy. And this, again, we talked about the beard fallacy. We talked about elements of gradation. This is what not only evolution, but everything in nature.
Well, this is the point, Lilith. This is the point that I'm struggling to grasp.
Okay.
So this is the point I'm struggling to grasp because, so you're saying that eventually this divergence occurs and then two distinct and new species occur or evolve. Okay.
Yes.
But I mean, just think about that concept. It doesn't really make much theoretical sense. So, for example, would you argue if there was no human migration, like human migration, let's say over the last few hundred years, if there was no human migration, eventually the Aborigines in Australia would not be able to interbreed with the European population or with the Native American Indian population? That's what you're proposing, isn't it? Because they would divert.
By eventually, how long are you talking? Because it is
Well, I don't make it
entirely separated. And I mean, nobody even invented a boat for another 1,000,000 years. And we were totally separated.
Well, that's itself.
I would argue
that's one of my arguments against evolutionary theory, or the out of Africa theory
just
as well.
Just because we are still one species doesn't mean we couldn't diverge. All species could diverge if they are separated in a way that they cannot overcome. You can observe this.
You're arguing that, so you would argue that the native Aborigines could diverge from the Native American Indians. Right, so I would argue that's there's no evidence.
After what, 1,000,000 years or so? Yeah, sure, fine, whatever. That's not a grounds for racism now. These are minor, unimportant distinctions. Any population, if sufficiently divided for a sufficiently long period of time in a way that they have no means of overcoming, will diverge, because they're going to have slightly different, even if it's only slight, they're going to have different circumstances that they're adapting to.
But do you understand the technical or theoretical difficulties with this proposition? Because
not remotely.
So what you're saying is, let's say, for example, hypothetically, you're arguing that let's say if there was no human migration, no contact between different continents, the Aborigine population in Australia and the Native American Indian population in the Americas would eventually get to a point where they become two distinct species and they cannot interbreed with each other, right? That's what you're suggesting.
No.
Okay.
No.
What's your problem with that?
No. Hold on. The big mistake that is made here is that we're talking about human populations, as if they are evolved from different human populations. That is not the case. There is one human population where different smaller populations have adapted to their particular environment. That means a darker skin color, which is pretty much the same thing as women having red hair, blonde hair. It is literally at the exact same level. There is one species, and I don't know if you have noticed. I'm clearly a Caucasian. If I go outside and I sit in the sun, I tend to go brown. Lilith, on the other hand,
I go red. I turn into a lobster.
See, but we are all still part of one and the same species. We're still part of one and the same species, and now that we have the ability to travel all over the world, the prognosis is that eventually, over time, we will end up with one particular human species due to interbreeding. And
we already have one species, in fairness.
Yes, because we are one species, and the only thing that makes us distinct is back in the time where we were separated and we adapted to the environment we were in.
Yes.
That is why people in Africa are black. People like the Aborigines were black. People like the Native Americans had a darker color. You've got in South America where they got a more darker color. It all depends on the environment you're in. It has
Actually, I
nothing to
don't
do
have a
with
question for the
this.
live chat.
This has nothing to do with evolution per se, because we're not different species. Go ahead.
No, but that's the point. That's the point. We're not different species. But the argument from evolutionary theory is that we would become different species if given enough time to diverge.
Okay, do
How
you
how
understand?
how
I would
how
argue.
okay
No,
how
Peter,
is it
Peter,
how is it that you
Peter,
are
stop.
so ignorant? How is it
Peter,
that you are
stop.
so no wait how is it that you are so
No.
ignorant that we actually know that the human species, due to how we have evolved and are able to have this large population, it is really hard to get new evolutionary traits to spread among the entire population. It is
point
No, this
nearly
was the
it is
whole-
nearly
this was the
impossible.
hypothetical.
Peter,
Wait,
you're
wait.
not
No, I
understanding the
need to
question.
make one
No, you're
additional
not.
I need to make one additional point, because we have also evolved to the point where we are changing our own environment. We have cars, we have airplanes, which means we have an entirely different
Peter,
environment.
stop talking.
And so there is
We
no
are
need,
not
there is no
talking
need.
about a modern environment. He is asking, in an environment wherein we developed no technology to surpass the bounds of distance, which would involve us being far less intelligent than we are, which would involve, well, certain restrictions on our linguistic capacity and our social interaction, which is what developed our brains into the way that they are, but whatever, fine.
Yeah.
I want to know, Doctor, if in your mind, for example, hypothetically, in some alternate universe, the Native Americans and the Aborigines of Australia were to be apart for 2 million years, to the point where they could no longer successfully interbreed, at least to any demonstrable degree. Would you consider one of those races to be superior to the other?
Absolutely not. Why would I?
Well, and that is the question then about your objection, because the thing that makes us as humans so distinct, as you pointed out yourself, is our ability to conceptualize, our ability to engage in abstract thought. Now, I hope that you would agree that the technology of language has greatly facilitated this capacity. We've been able to exchange ideas in a very complex way, which has allowed us to abstract. We conceptualize things to a degree that other animals do not necessarily. But that, again, is a development of language. Yet, as Peter pointed out, it's not just chimpanzees. Elephants, for example, are frequently studied by various biologists. They have been known to not only mourn their dead, but, for example, they are typically a matriarchal society. And when matriarch leads the group, and when she dies, they've actually observed entire groups of elephants, in migration, come upon the bones of a former matron. The bones mind, which would, and yet recognize that this was their former matron, and caress the bones and mourn the passing and touch and say, have this touchstone. So their only way of manipulating matter is their nose, which does not leave them a great deal of capacity for developing writing, mastering chemical reactions, fire, hunting, the whole rest of it. They're not a predator as well, which we were, at least to some degree, a coordinated predator, which really does help to sharpen things. Yet they have, without these advantages that we possess of opposable thumbs and coordinated predation, they still have the capacity, at least for the degree of abstract thought, to recognize their dead even by the bones, to mourn them, and to go forward. So we're talking about intellectual development here.
No, we're not. Lily.
That has allowed us to expand beyond travel. It allowed us to travel, allowed us to expand beyond the limitations of just walking.
Yeah, those are very primitive emotional responses, which I concede animals can demonstrate experience.
But
The
how do they
intellectual
recognize
ability
the
of
bones of their
of-
matriarch?
well, memory. I don't
But
contest
don't you
that
think that
animals have
such a
memory.
distinct memory to be able to
But-
recognize a skeleton and a
Yes,
location?
Lily.
That's a little more specific than just a general
Yes.
feeling of.
No, I agree. It's cognitive ability. It's cognitive ability.
Quite so.
But Lilith, when we talk about human exceptionalism, we're talking about the human intellect, which is able to conceptualize, rationalize, understand its own existence, exercise. Humans are the only species that can exercise themselves over their own nature. They're the only species that can understand their own existence. They're the only species that can engage in a discussion like this. Okay?
How do you know?
No one can reasonably.
How do you know that is true?
Well,
let me ask you. Hold on,
No,
hold
Peter,
on.
let him answer the question.
No,
I
because
want to know
no,
for
because
sure.
I got something that I want him to answer. So, are you aware that there's a species called meerkats?
yes, I am.
Okay,
I'm aware,
what do
Peter,
you know?
of
What do you know about meerkats?
Bless their
Very
fuzzy
much.
little hearts.
Tell me.
Sorry,
Tell me.
I asked you
Tell me.
what do you know? What do you know about meerkats?
Please tell me. Not very much.
How could I tell you what you know about meerkats?
No. So sorry, you're right. Okay, so I don't know very much about meerkats. Please, could you tell me about meerkats?
Okay, so meerkats have a language, a distinctive language that we have recently discovered. If a human is approaching a colony, they will warn each other. They cannot make the distinction whether or not the human is male or female, but they can make the distinction on which kind of clothes they're wearing, especially the
Ooh.
color. So the meerkat that is looking out can give out a warning. There is a human approaching in a yellow shirt. If then a human approaches in a red shirt, the meerkat will warn for a human approaching in a red shirt. We have recently discovered this type of language in meerkats. And
Are you
so
really?
this is a distinct language which is used to warn the population.
And are you really, Peter? Are you really comparing that intelligence to the intelligence displayed by an Einstein or a Newton or a Descartes? I mean,
Yes.
I would say that there is a great
Yes,
difference
I
there.
am. Yes, I am.
I'm asking,
Because
I think,
because 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 the
how do you know what
species
goes on
hold
when
on,
you're
the
not looking?
species that Einstein was part of started out exactly the same way. And I'm also comparing. For instance, chimps, who are now observed to have entered the Stone Age. If you go back, you know that humans at one point in time entered the Stone Age. Well, chimps have done the same thing now. So, and what astonishes me is that you are making objections to something that you are completely unaware of, what we already know. And the fact that you have internet, I think you have no excuse for your ignorance. Another thing that I need to say is we've come up to an hour and 40 minutes. I usually want to keep this to an hour and a half.
Okay.
I would be more than happy to have you back on our channel. And
I think we need to continue.
what I also would try and do, and I've messaged him. He was online earlier. He's no longer online at the moment. A friend of mine who has been a co-host on this channel multiple times, Jackson Wheat.
Oh, I know. Well, I've come across him. Sorry.
Yes. Okay. So.
Knowing on the internet is
Well,
somewhat
No, I know,
nebulous
I know.
term.
Well,
Fair enough.
the fun fact is that I'm also producing Jackson's shows now. So what we could do is we could have you back on here where you can talk again to Lilith and I, And I will
Absolutely.
ask Jackson Wheat to invite you onto his channel because
Okay.
he has a show where he talks to people.
Yes.
If he's willing to do that, you can talk to an evolutionary biologist, at least
I
someone
don't need to talk to
who's
biologists.
studying to be. Well,
Now, wait a
Well,
second.
well,
he could provide you with a lot of information
Peter,
that you
have you heard this argument? Okay, Peter, have you heard this? Okay,
that you obviously haven't researched yourself. And to me,
but
that look would
Peter and
think
Luna,
I would
I,
think that if you have objections to something, that you would at
right,
least do everything in your power to learn
okay,
about the thing that you're objecting to.
fine. So can I ask you both, have you heard of this argument from Muslims, which is you cannot criticize Islam if you haven't read the Quran in Arabic?
I have.
I have also heard it. I
So
find fault with it
You have
it's
heard of
it's.
it.
for several
Do you
reasons,
remember
but
when
I'm willing to
hold on,
justify those.
Nirushan, do you remember when you emailed me that I asked you if you got my email address from another guy, and you said no, I don't know him. I came on. I watched
Oh,
Modern.
yes, correct.
Okay,
Yes.
that guy was the Muslim who asked the very question you just asked me.
Yes. So the point I'm trying to make is that you can criticize an idea or a theory without having, you know, without having been part of the institution that promotes that theory. I don't think you need to
You
actually.
don't have to be part of the institution. I agree
No.
with you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
No, 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 no.
I
yeah.
fully
But
agree with you as
no,
well.
you don't at all
So
have to be part of the institution. But don't you think? Now, for
Mhm.
example, I possess a Quran. When I wasn't sure because you had been referred through a Muslim contact of Peter's,
Right. Okay.
I grabbed my copy of the Quran. Now,
Yeah.
it is not in Arabic. I do not understand Arabic. I can criticize those who say you cannot understand Islam unless you read the original Arabic, because, of course, that is a language I do not understand. And that leads us again into the object of arguments from ignorance. But I would say that as someone who is not a Muslim and has never been a Muslim, if I am going to make a criticism of Islam, I need to be open to the possibility that I may not have all the information and that it might be important to listen to members of Islam, not necessarily that I'm going to believe everything they claim about everything, but that in order to understand their perspective genuinely,
Mhm.
it would be important to take ideally several different perspectives from within Islam. I mean, as we all know, no doubt you've
Well,
encountered, there
yeah.
are Shia and
Yeah.
Sunni, there are Wahhabi and
Mhm.
Ahmadiyya
Mhm.
Muslims. So there might be several different theological perspectives on some particular point. And indeed,
Absolutely.
loath
Well,
as
Luna,
I am to make
bear
the
in mind,
comparison, in science, there might be several different people arguing for a particular
yes,
explanation of some tiny point in
I agree.
evolution.
But bear in
But the
mind, I had
larger frame, I should be
Mhm.
open to information from those
Absolutely.
people.
But bear in mind, I have a medical degree, so I've studied genetics, I've studied embryology, I've studied anatomy, physiology, biochemistry. So I am aware of the core concepts that are used in evolutionary theory.
Yet you
But
haven't been able to answer some of our questions about examples of things. For example, and a very simple question, and one I think we should have probably started with, and my apologies for not doing so. What would prove you wrong?
well, I'm not. What do you mean? What would prove me wrong? My assertion is that evolutionary theory has not been proven to a reasonable degree. I'm not asserting that evolution is false. I'm not asserting that evolutionary theory is false. I'm not
No,
asserting that
that's
it's
fair enough.
true.
But what
Right?
but
So
that no,
my
quite. But
criticism of it is
in
from an
response
objective
to
point
your
of view,
own
where I'm
no.
evaluating.
In response to your own qualification,
Right.
what would you consider demonstrating evolution to a reasonable degree? And in a linked sense, would you be open to learning more about evolution from that
Okay.
perspective in
Good
order
question.
to better refine what
It's a
would
good question,
demonstrate
Luna.
evolution to you?
This comes exactly. Nothing, because that's the point that comes. Comes down to the point I made at the beginning, which is that evolution is a faith. It's not science, because you can never prove it. It's unprovable. It's unobservable.
Let me ask.
faith.
Hold on. Time out. Time out. Time out. Time out. Time out. Time out. Because I find this very insulting. You
just said nothing would change your mind.
No, wait a minute. You are accusing me. No, hold on. Time out. Time out. I do not want to mute you. Please, time out. I do not want to mute you, but you have to let me finish.
Okay.
You are accusing me and Lilith, but I can only speak for myself. You are accusing me of using faith. I told you already that I'm an epistemist. I do not insult you. So please stop insulting me. Another thing that I would add is that you keep putting forward a false dichotomy, because you say that you can not, you couldn't criticize anyone because you're not part of the institution. What you have put forward is that you make a claim. Evolution hasn't been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And for more than an hour and a half, you have demonstrated a complete lack of knowledge of what the theory of evolution entails and what evidence we actually have at the present day. So in order to make your claim and back it up, I think what you have done in the past hour and a half is just show that you have a baseless claim, because you haven't done the research. And what I find kind of insulting is that you say, well, I don't need to learn more about it in order to refute it. I don't need to learn about the evidence that we have to see whether or not it's proven beyond reasonable doubt, because if I have already claimed that it isn't proven, so why would I look at the evidence that would prove it beyond a reasonable doubt? And I think
Peter,
that is really dishonest.
I'd like to speak for myself as you spoke for me. I agree with Peter. I agree with Peter in the matter of faith. Faith is insulting. It is degrading. It is dishonest. I do not employ it. If it can be demonstrated to me that I hold any belief based upon faith, I will immediately discard that belief without fear or favor, no matter what it may be. Now, what demonstrates to me that you have been dishonest is that when I asked you, first of all, what would prove you wrong and what further information might perhaps allow you to refine that question, your answer was nothing. You claim you have a philosophical objection to evolution without understanding what exactly proof, presumably in the sense which you mean, which would be the legal sense of proof beyond reasonable doubt, as opposed to some sort of mathematical concept. You don't seem to understand what that would involve, which would be fine if you were willing to learn, because of course, as I've said repeatedly, we do not know everything, and every person cannot be an expert in all matters. It's not practical. But if you are unwilling to learn enough about evolution to understand what would demonstrate it to you, then your position is not honest. You have not said, well, this would prove me wrong, or that would prove me wrong, or perhaps even I have not considered what would prove me wrong. Perhaps I need to look into it further. You have said that nothing could prove you wrong, and you take a shelter in the idea that you are coming from a philosophical perspective, but you don't appear to understand what that means, because the philosophical perspective is not going to justify an eternal demonstration of remaining in an argument from ignorance for all time, no matter what evidence is presented to you.
Right, Linda. Because the reason I've argued that is because I've said that, in my opinion, evolution is unprovable. Right, that's why I made that claim.
And then speaking from a legal point of view.
So Well, let me finish, please. So the same way that I cannot prove to you that Christianity is wrong or Christianity is true, I cannot
Oh, I
prove to
can.
you that evolution. Well, you can't, and I can't. Or let's say you
How
can't
much
prove that.
would you like to wager?
Well, I could happily engage with you in a discussion on that, but you cannot prove that the Christian God does not exist. You cannot prove that the Christian God does exist. These are because they're not scientific hypotheses. They're not scientific questions. They're unfalsifiable.
I can.
And that is a lie. They are indeed falsifiable.
Can I finish my point? Can I finish my point, please? So
Please do.
the assertion that you descended from a single cell common ancestor is not falsifiable. It's not provable. It's not
Yes, it
testable.
is.
It's not observable. Of course it is. Okay, please go forth. Tell me how that
Again,
is.
we've already demonstrated many, many different lines of evidence to attempt to demonstrate it to you. But our objection, if I understand, Peter, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, but our objection is that you appear to remain determined not to understand enough of evolution to be able to accept evidence if it is presented to you in sufficient quantity. For example, we can demonstrate the common ancestry of all eukaryotes. That means all multicellular creatures and several single cellular creatures. Yes, genetics, mitochondrial DNA. You are familiar with mitochondrial DNA, are you not?
Hold on.
You can demonstrate biochemical
Are
similarity.
you familiar with mitochondrial DNA?
Time out.
Yes.
Before we get into a new subject, we have been going on for an hour and 50 minutes. I really want to wrap this up.
Fair enough.
And I really want you, Nirushan, to come back for an additional show. I will do what I can to hook you up with Jackson, which should be really interesting because he knows a lot more about this than...
If I'm present and you provide additional sources, I'll happily look them up beforehand so we can discuss them. I'd be quite happy to do that.
Yeah. So what do you say, Nirushan? Do you want to continue this at another time?
Absolutely, Peter. I'd be more than willing to. I've enjoyed our discussion today, and I think we've all benefited. I'm sure to some extent.
So
I don't think we've changed anyone's minds. But
someone in the side chat just said, phony Beatlemaniac said, I think Lilith is getting annoyed, and I responded, not only Lilith.
So
we get quite heated
moderate.
when it comes to this subject, because this is a subject
this is perhaps modestly annoyed. This is not truly angry.
No. I've seen you angry. That's
Can
different.
I make one final point? Just one final point, Peter. I'm
Go ahead.
not actually arguing that evolution is false. That's my whole premise. I'm not saying evolution is false.
No, we do understand that.
We do understand
that. But we're talking about what would demonstrate it. And you appear not to know what would answer that question. So if I may make a suggestion, and of course this is a suggestion, you do not absolutely have to. But I would suggest between now and whatever future point we have you on, in which case I would be quite interested to engage in the discussion, that you look into evolution a little more and contemplate what precisely would demonstrate it to you to a sufficient degree. I'm speaking of proof only in the legal sense, beyond a reasonable doubt, not
I thought about
mathematical proof.
I've thought about this for many years, and
can I make another suggestion? I can shoot you a link to the documentary, the Nova documentary, Intelligent Design on Trial. I literally have a copy. I have a copy of that on this channel, but I'm not allowed to make that public because of legal reasons. But I can shoot you a link to. It's copyrighted. I can shoot you a link to the original poster on YouTube where you can watch it. So that shouldn't be a problem. So I really want to wrap this up, and people who are in the side chat, stick around, because we have something that is actually really, really, really relevant to this conversation. There's a new book out written by Jackson Wheat and R.J. Downard, which deals with all the claims, anti-science claims against evolution. So maybe, Nirushan, you should get a copy. That commercial is also on our channel, so go look for that. The links to Amazon where you can buy the book are there. So I wanna wrap this up. Lilith, thanks as always for being there.
It's
Dr.
a pleasure.
Nirushan, thanks for coming on. And
You're welcome.
it did get heated. At least we can end on a cordial, in a cordial way, on a
Absolutely.
friendly manner.
I
So
enjoyed
please,
the discussion.
please,
Nothing like the expansion of one's intellectual muscles, don't you find, Doctor?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
okay.
Quite
So
so.
Dr. Nirushan, stick around until after I ended the show, and we can talk a little
Sure.
offline and maybe set up something for a new date. I want to thank everyone in the side chat, and especially I want to thank God Hates Us All for shooting me a couple of links. I will go look at those, and we'll see you all back next time, and
I
that
love
will
you
that will
all,
actually be,
especially.
hold on, that will
Oh,
actually
I
be,
adore you, Dave. You're wonderful. Mwah.
tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll have Robert on with Gary. So Dr. Nirushan may want to watch, because would be a continuation of the debate that he had on Modern Day Debate. So
All right.
Wow.
so
Gary's quite a lovely person.
he's a
I really
Yes, I
do
know.
like him.
he's a
I
really,
And
did know.
he's a really
he's
great
a
guy.
he's a very kind, reasonable
He's a
Christian.
Quaker.
He's not at
A Quaker.
all. Yes,
Absolutely.
precisely. He's
Yeah.
not at all one of those, Ken Hammy type nut jobs. So, and Robert, obviously, I adore Robert,
Yeah,
but
I think
he's
I think we all
Actually,
do.
quite.
So I really want to wrap this up. So that'll be tomorrow,
Yeah.
the same time as the show started today. So we'll catch you all there, and until then, keep in mind, truth has nothing to fear from inquiry. Catch you later, everyone. Bye bye.